Hey coders, I'm Cody Seibert and welcome to another tutorial where I'm going to show you how to build a tree browser using Vue.js. So basically on the right, this is what we're going to be building. It's a very simple component which, if given a tree-like data structure, is going to render out different divs that you can expand and collapse to view the file system or whatnot. And we're using an external module to kind of color the files based on the file extension. And we're doing some cool little stuff inside the component. And then lastly, if you click on one of these files, it's going to invoke a callback where we simply just display an alert. But if you think abstractly, you could do whatever you want, such as render something over on the right-hand side, maybe even show the file contents after you click on one of these files. So this is what we're going to build. Let's just go ahead and start building it. So I went ahead and just started up a project using the Vue CLI version 3. So over here on the left, you can see the bare bones project is ready to go. And on the right, we have it running. If we wanted to get started with this component though, let's go ahead and create a new file called treebrowser.vue. I'm going to go ahead and just scaffold out a new Vue file here. And of course, we need to go into app.vue and include that. So let's go ahead and just bring in tree browser wherever we plan to use it. I'll get rid of this image here, save this file. And just to verify that this is working, let's just go ahead and display some text. So I'm going to say h1 hello and write that out. Cool. So at this point, we should be good to go to start developing our tree browser component. The first thing I want to start with is let's look at how some JSON data may be represented to represent a tree structure, like a file system, right? And we're going to define a JSON object and pass that down into our tree browser as a property. So let's first, inside our app component, let's define a data function and let's return an object which has a root object on top of that, or it has a root property. And inside this root property, basically a root is going to be a node which has children. So if you know much about like graph theory, or if you've done like computer science data structures and stuff, we're basically just going to represent a tree using nodes that have children. So in this case, our root is going to have a name. So in this case, we'll do a slash. And then our node will have children attached to it, which is going to be an array. And then inside that array, we can have multiple other nodes. So our first node could be, let's say, music. And then, of course, that could have children. Keep doing a capital M. And then that child node could be, I don't know, name of song.mp3 or something like that. So that's one folder that could exist in our root directory. If we wanted to make another child, we could do name and we could say this is workspace that has children. And inside our workspace, we have multiple nodes. And let's just say we have one called source.js. So that's kind of the representation of what a file system looks like using JavaScript objects. Again, we have a node, which has a name, and then inside that we have children, which has nodes and names and nodes and names, etc., etc. And that will go down to however deep your file system is. So using that root data property, let's go ahead and try to pass that into tree browser. So the first thing I wanted to do is I'm going to go into tree browser. I'm going to define a props object. And again, you could do a props array. So I could do props as array of node. But in this case, we're going to actually define some defaults for props in the future. So I'm going to do a props object, which is going to have node, which is an object type. And once you define this props property on your Vue component here, you can use it. So for example, in our app.vue, I could simply just go over here. I could bind node to my root property inside my data function. And now inside of my tree browser, I could simply do node.name to render out that first slash that we had defined in our root. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. We have a good understanding of what the data structure is. Now we need to understand how to traverse it to display a file system. So going back to our tree browser, the first thing we kind of want to do is, of course, we're going to have to wrap this in a div because Vue requires only one component, which is exported in your template. So I'm going to wrap that in a div and just print out the name here. And I'm going to go ahead and split this out into two different sections. So the first section is going to be a div called node. And that's where we're going to have like the the icons for if it was expanded or not, and the name of the node, etc. So I'll go ahead and put the H1 in that. And then of course down here, what we're going to do is we're going to call tree browser again. And I'll do this in 1 second. In fact, I'll just go ahead and do this now. So if we take a step back and look at what we're trying to build, it's a component which recursively renders itself multiple times. So in order to recursively call yourself, we can just say tree browser again. But we need to make sure that we define a name over here on our component, or else you're not able to actually recursively render yourself. It won't know what tree browser is. Let's take a step back and think about what we need to do. So we already rendered out our name node, but remember we have this children property, which is an array that we need to loop over. So inside Vue, what we could do is just add a v4 inside that tree browser component, and I'll say for node in node.children. I shall name this child, not node. And then of course, if you're doing a v4 in Vue, you need to make sure you bind a key. So for now, I'll just do child.name. And that is basically going to loop over all the children of the node and create a new tree browser object and render out the name. So the last step is we're looping over all the children and rendering a new tree browser component. But remember, we require a node property. So over here, I'm going to bind node equal to the child. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And notice here on the right, it renders out all of our nodes. And one thing you'll notice is that the indentation isn't really useful. We can't tell like what is nested under other things. So I'm going to go back to my style over here and just make it scoped. And this will make sure that all the CSS inside the style is only scoped to this component that we're looking at. And for node, I'm going to say text align left. And we're going to start working on some logic to be able to simply indent based on the level that we're at. So notice we have everything aligned to the left. How do you think we could indent based on the depth, right? So if we're at the root level, we don't want to add anything to the left. But as we start going down the depth of the recursive calls, we need to kind of indent. So what we could do is, as a property, let's define yet another one called depth. That's going to be a type of number. And then we're going to default that to 0 for now. And basically, as we call tree browser, we just want to pass depth of depth plus 1. So if we're on this first entry, we're going to be depth of 0. Music will be depth of 1. Song will be depth of 2. Workspace will be depth of 1. And sources will be depth of 2. So now that we have the depth incrementing by 1 every time we traverse down the recursive call stack, how do we actually indent? Well, we just have to use CSS, right? And in Vue, we could simply just go over here and do a dynamic style binding. So I'll say bind style is equal to an object. And this is going to have a margin left of the depth times some amount. And I'm just going to go ahead and add pixel to it. In fact, if you want to be proper, let's just go ahead and do string interpolation here, like so. So if I save this, notice that now the entries or nodes are indented correctly based on the depth that we're at. In fact, I think the text is a little bit big, so let me just make the font size like 18 pixels instead. And I'm going to... Still seems kind of big. Let me look at it. Oh, because we're using H1. So instead of using an H1, let's just go ahead and just get rid of that for now. And we'll fix it up to make it a little bit better in the future. Okay, so now we're making some progress. Now we need to move on to kind of the next step, which is the ability to expand and collapse these different nodes depending on if they're clicked or not. So of course, let's go and add a new data property to keep track of if we've clicked the node and if it's expanded or not. So if I go to data and return expanded is false, we now have a property which is attached to the root level of all these different nodes. And then we could just simply hide or show the children based on if that's true or not. So over here, I'm going to say vif expanded, say that, and notice that now we only see this slash. And again, VIF is just a keyword in Vue where you can use it to hide or show DOM elements based on a Boolean value. So the next step is, how do we actually see or expand this view to see the children? What we could do for right now is just add a click callback. So say click, and then we want to simply set expanded is equal to the opposite or negate of expanded. And that's basically going to toggle based on us clicking on stuff. So just to show, if I were to click on this now, notice that it's toggling our different things. But unfortunately, it's hard to tell if something has been expanded or not. So let's go ahead and add some icons to the node so that we can tell if it's been expanded or not. So let's add a span, and I'm going to add the class of type. And basically, what I want to do is just display either the caret to the downward position or caret to the right, depending on if we're expanded or not. So in here, I can do a string interpolation and say expanded question mark, and that's a ternary operator if you're not familiar with, JavaScript's ternary operators. So if expanded is true, we simply want to display the string or the symbol 9660. And then otherwise, we want to display 9658. 9658. And go ahead and save this and end the interpolation. Cool. So now we have an actual icon which changes based on if we've clicked it or not. And now that we've done that, we notice that there's a bug, right? The icon is being rendered here for nodes that don't have any children. So let's try to prevent that from happening. So down here in our component, I'm going to add a computed object. And inside here, we can add a has children property. And that's just going to return this.node.children. So if this is defined, we have children. If it's not, we don't have children. And what we can do is only display this stuff if we have children. So here I'm going to do a VIF. We have children or has children. And now when I save this, I should be able to go down and the icon is hidden if we don't have any children. And the last thing I want to do is I want to add a little icon next to song for just to kind of further indicate that it's not a folder. It's more of a file. So over here, I'm going to add yet another span, and I'm going to add a symbol, which is going to be a circle here. And I want to display it if we don't have children. So I'm going to just do v-else here. So basically now, if we don't have any children, it's going to show this little triangle icon. So that's all cool and all, but how do we actually figure out if we've interacted with clicking on one of these songs? So what we could do is we could add a click callback here to the node. And instead of doing expanded is equal to not equals expanded, I could say node clicked. And of course, pass that the node. Actually, in fact, I don't need to pass that anything. And then down here, we can add yet another property called methods. And that's going to have a method name called node clicked, which we're going to do that same logic. So this dot expanded is equal to not expanded. And let's save and just test that out to make sure we didn't break anything. But also what we want to do is we want to check if the child has children, we want to go ahead and just emit a event so that our app.view can kind of do something depending on what you clicked. So over here, I'm just going to say if this dot has children, I'm going to simply this dot emit on click. Then I'm going to send back the node that was clicked. So this dot node. Actually, in fact, we want to do this when we don't have children. So only when we click files. So sorry about that. Just add a little negation there, and we wanted to check if we don't have children. So this is another cool thing that is attached to Vue components, the money sign emit. And basically this is going to emit an event called onClick, and it's going to pass this as the data, and it's going to bubble that up to any of the components that are listening. So inside app.view, which is our parent component, which is kind of listening, we could simply just do @onClick, and we could say, call some random function. So node was clicked. And of course, down here, we could just say close my data, and I'll say this is going to have a methods property. And inside the methods, we're going to say node was clicked. And that's going to take a node as a parameter. And we're going to simply just do alert node.name just to print out the name of what was clicked. And don't forget your comma there. So at this point, let's go ahead and test it out and see if we're doing okay. So we are getting a little error called this.hasChildren is not a function. And because computed properties are not actually functions, they're just booleans, or they're just variables that you can use. So instead, I'll just go ahead and backspace that function call. I'll save that and make sure there's no errors in the console anymore. So now when I click song.mp3, it should be saying this.emit on click, and it's sending out the node. And then over here, we're listening to it and calling node was clicked. But for some reason, it's not actually doing anything. So let's go ahead and just log out. We are clicked and save it here to see what's going on. So that's not being called. So I'm assuming that there's an issue here. So over here, I can say console.log, we are here. Okay, so we are indeed getting to this point, and we are emitting a onClick event. And the issue is that, remember, we're doing recursive calls. So here, if we want to bubble that up all the way to app.view, we need to remember to listen to the click callback here. So I can say at onClick, and I'm going to simply just do emit, and I'm going to say onClick, and then I could pass the node that was clicked. In fact, I think I need to do something like this. Node. Okay. So give it a callback function, which is going to take the node that was clicked and just simply propagate it up. And there may be a different way to do this in Vue. If anyone has a suggestion as to a better way to actually do this, or I just want to propagate that event up the tree and not worry about having to declare an onClick and doing that, let me know. But for now, I think this should work. So let's go back and try to expand and click on song. And saying this cannot read property emit of undefined. And that is because we don't need to use this here. Let me just go ahead and remove that and see if we can actually get this to work. There we go. So sorry about that. You got a little debugging session. Didn't mean to take that long. But as a recap, what was wrong was we are recursively creating these tree browsers. So when we click on song, it's going to propagate up to tree browser. So we need to make sure we're listening to that onClick event and just simply propagate it up until we finally hit the parents onClick callback, which is going to be this. So again, we'd add this because, like, let's say you wanted to change some other view depending on what the person clicked, and the tree browser component shouldn't really be responsible for knowing how to interact with that. Or, I mean, a different way is you could probably just pass in a callback function here and call it when we click on a node. But I think this way is a little bit more cleaner to actually emit an event and then do something when it happens. All right, so now that we've made this progress, let's just go ahead and add I went ahead and just generated a JSON object, which has more realistic data. So inside our source folder, I'm going to add a root.json file. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy some JSON that I already created by traversing my file system. Basically, I just took like one of my projects and it traversed the node modules folder and all this other stuff. So if I save this, we should have a better example piece of data to play around with. So going back to app.view, we could simply import that. So I'm going to say import root from ./root.json, and that's going to import that JSON object. And then instead of using it here, or instead of defining this here, I could just simply delete what we got and save that. So now when we refresh the page, notice that we have a much, much larger file system example with a lot more files. So now I think most of the functionality is basically done. We could probably just spend a little bit more time changing up the styles and centering this and stuff to make it look like I did before. So if I go back to app.view, let's just add a title here. I'll call this H1 tree browser or view tree browser. I'll go ahead and save that. Okay, so let's see if we can maybe style this a little bit more. So I'm going to do body, background color. I'm just going to do a little bit of a gray. And then I'm going to add color as white for now. Should be setting this to white. Let me refresh. I think it's, oh, that's why. Okay. Now we actually have a little bit nicer looking example application. So as a little bonus, what I'm going to do is I want to import a function which is going to take in a string and give us back a color hash. So basically, I can set different string values depending on, or different color values depending on what the extension is. The JavaScript files may be red, JSON objects may be like blue or something. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and go back to our terminal here. I'll do an npm install and save. There's a package called color hash, which kind of gives us the opportunity to do something like that. And while that's installing, let's go back to tree browser and let's simply import that here. So I can say import star as color hash from color hash. And then once we've imported that, we can say const color hash is equal to new color hash. And kind of ignore what's going on over here. We're installing a node package, so it's going to keep on refreshing until it's done. But what we want to do is basically figure out the extension of the name if we're at a node that has, like, you know, no children. And what we want to do is change the style dynamically based on that hash. So up here, where we're rendering out the name here, what I can do is simply wrap that in a span. And I'm going to say, bind that to style. And it's going to call a get style for the node. Dot name. Actually, I'll just do dot node. And then down here, we of course need to define a method, right? So over here, I'm going to say get style. I'm going to take in a node. And what we need to do is we need to first take the node if it has children. So if node.children, then we need to return some style. So I'm going to say return an object that has color of some hexadecimal. So I'll just say like red for now. And let's see what this does if we were to save this. I'm going to try reinstalling my node modules. I'm not sure what happened, but something might have broken when I was doing my setup for this video. So let's just reinstall everything and see what happens. All right, so now that that is done reinstalling, let's try to set up or rerun our serve command. And let's refresh this page. Cool. So if you notice here, if we have children, it's going to be red. So pretty much we can customize what we want our folder colors to be. Also, one thing I'll notice is that the icon is really, really close to the name. So over here, I'm going to just add a margin right of 10 pixels to these icons. I don't know if I've actually added a style called type. So over here, I'm going to say, oh, class of type, yep. And add a class of type to this one too. All right, so that looks a little bit cleaner. But back to what we're trying to do with that new package we imported is basically if we have children, we want to return some hard-coded red for folders, and else what we could do is we could simply call this method. So I'm going to say return color of color hash dot x, and then I'm going to get the extension of this file, which I can do node.name.split, and then split it by the dot, and just go ahead and give me the right side. And this is probably not the safest way to do this, but it works for right now for this little simple tutorial that I'm giving. Let's go ahead and save that and see if this is working as expected. So now you'll notice that all my different files, depending on the extension, will have a different type of color. And it actually looked like it worked for files that don't even have an extension. So cool, that's working pretty much exactly how we thought it was going to work. And then, of course, to kind of clean this up, I feel like I could dry this up a little bit. So here I'm just going to say let style is equal to red. Instead, I'll say let color. And then here, what I'll simply do, I'll say if node.children, or if they don't have any children, I'm going to say color is equal to that color hash logic. And then down here, I could just simply return color. Like so. Let's see if this works. I'll do a hard refresh just in case. Awesome. So that is working as we thought it would. So there you have it. There's how you build a tree browser using Vue.js. And really, it wasn't too difficult. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, or definitely subscribe to this channel if you thought this was a good tutorial. And again, I'm always open to feedbacks in the comments of how I can make my videos better. And I'm also open to suggestions as to what other type of little modules or components I should try to build and record and demo for you all.